Hey, welcome. In this lesson, we're going to be creating a deep clone. So the objective is to write a function that deep clones and creates a copy of a given object. The deep clone should not share any reference to the original object. And we know that if we simply do clone equals and whatever the object one, and if we update the name of that clone, then they're going to be referenced within both of the objects the same way. But when we use the function deepClone, that gives us two distinct objects, and we're able to change the values that are contained within these objects. So this is going to be the function that we're going to be calling, and initially it checks to make sure that the value that's passed into an object or an array, and if it's not an object or array, then it simply returns it back. The second function here is going to be the value of an array, so it maps through the array and recursively calls deepClone for each one of the items, allowing us to clone any nested arrays that are within the object that was passed in. And then here we're going to be creating the clone, and we're going to be iterating through each one of those items that are within the object and checking to see if it's got its own property. So this is going to be for object, as iterates over each key and recursively clones each value, and that's what this function is doing, and it's simply returning it back. And the approach, what this does is using this function will avoid any shallow copying and ensures that nested objects and arrays are fully cloned. Hey, welcome. This lesson we're going to be deep cloning an object. So I'm just going to be using the regular DOM interface here. I've got the browser window open. I've got the object that we're going to be working with. So we're going to be deep cloning this object and making a copy of it. I've got that connected to the HTML file in a JavaScript file called app.js. So this is currently what I have within the code for the app.js. I've got an object, and I'm just outputting into the console so that we can view it and just make sure that everything is there. So there are a few different nested objects within this main object. So what we want to do is we want to make a deep clone. So we're going to write a function that is going to accomplish the deep clone. So one of the things is that if we just simply do this where we've got a value here, and if we do a clone of object 1, it's going to still be related to that object 1. So if we make any changes to clone, and if we update the name for the clone, it's going to also affect the output of object 1. So we don't want that. We want the clone to be its own object, and this is what we can do within this function. So create the function, and we'll just call it deepClone, as that's what we're going to be doing within this function. We're going to pass in an object. So this is going to be the parameters there that we're going to be using, is going to be whatever object. And first of all, we want to check to make sure if the object exists, or if type of is not equal to an object. Then we want to handle that, because then that's going to throw an error there. So if we're trying to send in something that's not an object, then it's going to have an error there. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that I just returning back the object should be type of object is equal to object. So that just ensures that whatever we're sending into deepClone is going to be an object. So let's go ahead, that now that we've created the function, that we can send our object 1 into the deepClone. And it's throwing an error right away there because we're not returning back the object anymore. So it's going to comment that out, and now we're sending in the object that we have into deepClone, and it's going to return it back if it's not an actual object that we're sending in. So if we had something where we had a string value, and if we tried to send a string value in to the deepClone, and we can just output here that there's an error. And we can see that now this is returning back the error because this is a string. So we want to make sure that it is an object, and that our test is working to ensure that whatever data that we're sending in there, that this is going to be an object, so whatever data type. So we're going to also hand in a line so we can handle an array. And what this is going to do is this is going to be returning back the array of these deep cloned items, returning it back. So we're going to send it back into deepClone, the item. So if we're detecting if it's an isArray object. And what the isArray object does, so first of all, what the map method does, it's a method used to create an array by applying a provided function to every element within the original array. So this is going to be the function that we're applying to these items, and this is going to be making sure that these are being returned back. So we're iterating through all of the elements in the array, and for each one of those elements, we're returning back that provided function. So here we're calling the function deepClone. It's an item, and we're returning it back. So it's a custom function that creates a copy of the object or array. So it makes recursive copies of all the nested objects and their arrays. So that will allow us to handle if we had within the hobbies, if we had an array, or if we have some other data that we need to also pull out of an array, so in order to make deep clones of those values. So that's where we're adding that in. And here we're going to set up the original clone. So creating a variable, and this is going to be holding the cloned object as we're creating it. So creating a blank clone of that object. And then we're going to loop through and let the key and object, and as we're iterating through, we're going to check to see if it has its own property value. So check to see if the object, and we're using the built-in method, has own property. And this is where we're going to be looking for the key. And if it does, then we use the clone that we just created and assign an object name to it using the key value. And then we're going to just be assigning that to the deepClone object. So once again, we're sending it into the deepClone function. And this is going to be an object where we've got the key. And this is just sending in that value to it. So assigning that value to the clone key. And this will iterate through all of the nested objects that are within that object. And then what we want to do is, after this loop is finished, then we want to return back the clone value. And so let's also now output the value of clone. And we're going to make an update to clone just as we did before. So now we can see that we've got object 1 and clone, and they're actually deep clones. So the objects got cloned, and we've got the output there. And these errors here, these are just coming from here, so they're not actually errors. It's just returning back. It's not actually an object that we can iterate through. So we can now remove out that error.